Let's now go to the final chapter, where we are going to talk about grids and media queries. So first of all, as you already know, the platform comes with a grid, meaning that you are able to align elements with that grid easily. You notice as well, and you already noticed that you are actually able to configure the grid. You are able, first of all, to tell if your theme is to use a grid or not. And if it's to use, you are able to tell how many columns and what's the column width and what's the gutter width. And on the bottom, you can see the total width of your grid. So by default, it comes with 12 columns, 60 pixels wide each column, and has a gutter of 20 pixels. This means that the total size of the grid is 940 pixels. Additionally, the grid of the platform adds a margin left and a margin right of 20 pixels, meaning that the total width is 980 pixels. Why these 20 pixels on each side? Because when we go to a tablet, the elements will be at least 20 pixels away from the border, which is a good usability practice. So currently, the grid has a problem, which is, imagine this application. This application is running there on the middle, and it's a high analytical application, lots of data. However, notice that on a full HD screen, we are actually not using this entire space. So we are pretty much using half of the screen size. What if we could use this? We could use more space. Well, technique that we can easily use in our projects is to have a fluid grid. And you know that on the version 8, the platform doesn't have fluid grid. However, you can add a small CSS to your theme so that it may be fluid. However, it's not fluid entirely. It's only fluid on the first level. Why? Because as soon as you start working with fluid grids, you're going to change the way you think about grids. This means that the grids are going to be in percentage. So imagine that you want to divide your screen in two. So you put 6 columns, like this. Perfect. Now, on the first 6 columns, you want to create 3 elements, one with 3 columns, one with 1 column, and one with 2 columns, like this. And notice that this happened. So instead of being occupying the 6 columns, so 3 plus 1 plus 2 are 6 columns, instead of occupying the entire container, it only occupies half. Why? It's simple, because when we are talking about fluid grids, it's percentage. So 6 columns, it's the same as 50%. So if we divide it first into 50 and then we put 6 more columns, we are dividing again in 50%. That's why 6 columns inside 6 columns only occupy half. And this is a really big change of the mindset. This is a really big change. How can we actually do this, or how did we actually solve this? You can see this post on the community where it's all explained. So feel free to go for it and to learn a little bit more how to use this script and how it can help you to have a semi-fluid grid. Let's talk now about media queries and how they can help us. First of all, do you know what media queries are? If not, media queries allow us to render the content to adapt to the conditions of the screen resolution or the screen type, meaning we can define a series of CSS rules or imports where the browser only apply those rules when this media queries. So they allow the content rendering to adapt to the conditions such as the screen resolution. So media queries basically allow us to define different CSS for different targets. Let's see an example of that. So you can see here that we can use media queries, for example, when we are importing a CSS style sheet, and where we can say media equals to max width 800 pixels. This means that import is only going to be done by the browser if the max width of the screen is 800 pixels. We can also use it in our themes, in our style. And to use it, we can say that, for example, the faceted sidebar is not going to be displayed if the screen has a max width of 600 pixels, meaning on smartphones this element wouldn't be displayed. And the browsers know how to read this and know how to interpret this, and they will apply this or not. In order to this to be effective, the media queries should be put it on the end of your theme, on the end of your style sheet, so that they are the last things that the browser looks for or the last things that the browser interprets. Additionally, we have more things that we can do besides the max width. We can use min width, or we can even use orientation for tablets and smartphones. Additionally, we can specify device. We can say that this CSS here is only going to be applied on TVs where the min width is 700 pixels and the orientation is landscape. So for example, you can tell that this is for all, or this CSS is only for printing when you are printing, or for screen, or for braille. Additionally, all of these features we can test and detect. So media queries work as an if. If that condition is true, then the CSS that is on it is going to be applied, or the import is going to be done. You can learn more on the Mozilla Development Network, the link on the bottom. And this brings us to the next subject, which is RWD. Do you know what does RWD stands for? Or what is it at all? Well, RWD stands for Responsive Web Design. And as you can imagine, or as you already know, London theme is responsive. However, something that you should be aware, even Ethan Marcotte, this gentleman was one of the first persons to use the term responsive web design and to create the concepts around it. Even he mentioned that responsive web design isn't intended to serve as a replacement for mobile websites. Why? This is telling us that London theme is not the answer to every problem regarding the mobile devices. Why? Simple. Because a responsive theme usually, or a responsive theme, it's because a responsive theme it's not optimized for mobile usage, and mobile does have some constraints, and here we can see clearly two examples of that. On the left side we have the same site in responsive. On the right side we have the same site but now mobile optimized, meaning that for mobile we have a different portal. We can first of all notice the speed on 3G, that on the left is 15 seconds while on the right is only almost 2 seconds to download the entire site. Additionally, the size that we are downloading on the left side is 346. On the left side, it's much more than twice larger than on the right side. We should have in consideration that the use case is different from a tablet, from a desktop, and from a smartphone. And there are times where we should do specific UIs for smartphones. Always remember that being responsive means that the browser will arrange elements on the client side, but that means that all of the resources have to come to the device. All of the CSS, all of the words, all of the elements that probably is going to be hidden on the device, it's all coming to client side. It's all just bringing on making the user wait more time. Now let's move on to exercise 9. final thoughts. First of all, thank you for So we have reached the end of our CSS workshop. So the final thoughts are, first of all, be pragmatic. If CSS gets in your way, just go the other way. And a good example of this is the vertical centering. When you are trying to align vertically an element, and if it's causing too much trouble because you cannot use line height, or line height is not helping you enough to do this, what you should do is you have two options. First of all, just use a table, and that's it. It solves it. Second way is actually use the table in CSS. How? Instead of an element having display table, it will have display table cell. And the two elements that you want them to be centered, vertically centered, the two elements are display table cells. Display table cell. Simple as that. UCSS has a fast prototyping tool. So just go to the browser, show the things to the user. If he doesn't like, just go to the inspector and start changing the element right in front of them. They will love it. If you have to support older browsers like IE7 or even IE8, and you have an element that is good looking and it needs to look the same as every browser, just use. If it gets too difficult, too quirky, just use an image. And a good example of that is buttons. Above all, it's no magic. Use inspector for everything. Always CSS in your favor and never against you. Any questions? If you have any question or anything that you need to know, feel free to reach me out at ruben.goncalves@outsystems.com. Happy CSS coding. Bye bye. See you next time. Keep up the awesome CSS work. Thank you for your time. Happy coding. Thank you for your time and happy coding.